Hi everyone. As you can see, we've got a little bit of a different setup today, and hopefully this all works out well. Today we're going to be talking about how to engage your audience with dynamic presentations. And I thought that the best way to start this was by showing you a particularly dynamic presentation that was made very famous by a physician and statistician, Hans Rosling. And one of the things that I'm actually very curious about is how many of you watching the video next to me right now are familiar with this animation. I would suspect that many of you are, but you might surprise me. Maybe this is a new sort of a new thing that you haven't seen this before. So first of all, back up a little bit, I guess. This is our DataGraph live presentation for today. My name is Pamela Schultz. Any of you who don't have DataGraph, I just wanted to mention this, that you can always go to our website in our description and you can download a trial version of DataGraph. So with that, this animation, let me go ahead and play this one more time again. This is data that shows us fertility versus life expectancy. I have used this before in some of our DataGraph presentations because it is so well known. Actually, the presentation that Hans Rosling originally gave this, showed this information using this animation, was in 2006, and I checked the stats on the TED Talk website, which is where he gave this. It has 15 million views, and on YouTube it has 3 million views. So very well watched, very engaging presentation. And one of the things in particular that he did with this data, which, let's see, let me actually maybe explain a couple of other elements that are here. You can see how, well, obviously I have the year behind. You'll also notice that this is going beyond our current year that we're in. This also includes projections of data, and each point is a country. I can kind of go back to the beginning and then hit play here again, starting in the 1800s. And each size of each point is scaled based on the population, which is why the points grow over time. This animation actually that I'm showing you is something that I recreated in DataGraph. And one of the things I did a little bit different was I added the name of the country for countries where the population is over 100 million. So it's sort of, I think, also interesting to look at and see how different countries, over time, you can see how the population is increasing to that point when their name pops into the screen. And see what else I want. Oh, I guess basically, well, this particular file, there is a version of this in our example files, but I'm updating that. And in fact, I will show you in more detail how to do this in another presentation. But today, again, I wanted to sort of start with this because I think it's such a great, if you're not aware of this presentation, I definitely recommend checking it out. Easy to Google, Hans Rosling, the best stats you've never seen. And this is, I guess, for any of you watching this, what we're talking about in terms of engaging and making dynamic presentations, or what I'm going to talk about today, is really all about engaging with dynamic presentations of data. So we're not talking about text that flies in or transitions between slides. We're really talking about how can you present your data in a dynamic way. And again, I'm really interested if anyone, I don't know, wants to comment and say whether or not they're familiar, if they've seen this animation before or they're familiar with that. It's also nice to know on the chat if you can let me know where people are in the world who are watching this. That's always fun to see, and say hello to everyone who's out there. And okay, so there are really three different categories that I came up with in terms of the types of dynamic techniques that you can use in a presentation that I wanted to start talking about. And the first is a data reveal, data highlighting, and then I'll give you some more examples of creating some animated movies. And we're going to do two things. I am going to show you give you some advice on if you wanted to show data reveals, pulling slides into, say, PowerPoint or Keynote, and review a little bit of what we talked about last week for any of you who have not seen the one we did last week. And I see hello from Fairbanks, Alaska. That's great. I love to see where everyone is. I'm in North Carolina, by the way. This is a very great animation, and would be interested in using it on climate data. That definitely would be a great use of this type of time series animation. So anyway, so we're going to be, I'm going to show you a little bit of a review from last week, how we get these images quickly from DataGraph into a Keynote or a PowerPoint. But then we're really going to focus for the rest of the presentation on this presentation mode in DataGraph and how you can really do things, in particular, give a presentation in a very dynamic way with your data. And so first, let me go through and give a couple of examples of these data reveal, data highlighting, for example. So let's try, here we go. So this is a very simple example of a graphic. This is one of the graphs that's in the DataGraph example files, interface. And in this graphic, there's a couple of different things that we could do to make this a little bit more dynamic. So within DataGraph, I could go ahead and hide different aspects of my data. So instead of showing this all at once, I could start by saying, I don't want to show any data to start with, and do a reveal of my data. So just simply starting with the bar graphs and then starting with the line. So again, this is a very simple example, but this is what I mean by a data reveal. And a data highlighting or data emphasis could be something like changing the point size. So if I'm talking about this particular set of data, I could see how that changes. And the first one, just having certain data hidden and revealing, this is easy enough to create slides that we can do this in, again, a Keynote or PowerPoint. But doing this sort of interactive highlighting, this is a slider I wanted to use, this is what doing a presentation in DataGraph gives you this ability to do this very easily. Let me show you another example. Here's one using a pie chart. Again, I could just show you this to begin with, but I think there's something sort of engaging about even something as simple as a pie chart to start by showing nothing. You know, we tend to, I think, when we give presentations, think we have to show titles and bullets, and you know, you can have a blank slide where you start by just revealing certain portions of the data. So for example, in this sort of made up data, you know, we could say fig and elderberry. These were our top two. Then as we add in more, the dewberry and the cherry come out to 17%. Those are the next two. And then possibly, again, you know, showing my last two, and even having this ability to highlight certain sections. Again, the reveal, all of this I'm doing within DataGraph. We could set up these slides for Keynote, but doing this sort of thing dynamically and being able to on the fly change which category you know, if I'm talking about something different or talking about a different category and I really want to focus on the elderberry, for example, I can dynamically, while I'm giving my presentation, sort of do this sort of thing and give that kind of data highlighting. Okay, so one more that I want to show you. This is actually a transition that, again, there's an example file that we have that does this within DataGraph, and this just shows you, here's one set of bars, and here is the, you know, so we have an initial state and then we have a final state. So these are all things that we can do within DataGraph. Now, if you wanted to, you could take something like this and make it a movie that you could bring into Keynote. But what what I'm doing here is all through DataGraph itself. So I wanted to go ahead then and, as I said, just back up a moment and show you quickly how would I go ahead and bring in my graphs from DataGraph into a Keynote. So let me go ahead and do a share my screen. Let's see, this is now slightly different. I'm going to stop the presentation mode that I'm in. Okay, so now I have my my screen here where I have a Keynote presentation, and I've sort of pre-set this up. But what I did was, let me also bring over. I have to bring my file back in here. So here's my DataGraph file, and this is this graph that you're seeing here. This is the one that I first created, and this is what I was just sharing with you, where I was adding emphasis. And to do the hiding and revealing is a matter of using these buttons here. So there's two different commands that are set up for drawing data. You can see by the icon, this is the bars. Here's my points. And it's very easy for me to just click the hide button and not show the data. Just so in case you haven't used these before, there's also an exclude button, and the difference is that that completely ignores that data set. So for example, if I exclude the line that's here, then you might notice that the range of the graph slightly changes because it is completely ignoring this command. It's as though I've deleted it even though I haven't. So anyway, so that's how I can kind of control what I'm seeing. And if, for example, I wanted to take this image and bring it into my Keynote file, let me just add a blank slide. Then if you recall, last week we talked about the zoom of the slide, and this slide here is set to a 50% zoom. So if I want to take this from my DataGraph file and bring it into Keynote, then I would first recommend setting the zoom to something very similar to what you have in Keynote. And in fact, I'll just go ahead and show you my final product here. I set the zoom to 50%, which, well, maybe I should just show you this so you can really see what happens. And what you see is it's very small. So sometimes what we see on the screen is there's just not enough pixels once we put this in the proper zoom for our presentation mode. So I changed the size here to 1000 by 600. Now if I take this and I copy my figure and I go into PowerPoint and paste, that is a nice size. I don't have to resize anything. And then if I want to, again, do this sort of a data reveal within Keynote, I can do an option drag, make a copy of this, and I can go back into DataGraph. Now let's unhide the second set of data. Again, copy the figure, go into here. Now, if you want to replace the figure in Keynote, double click and then paste. Otherwise, it creates a second copy. But now I've done a complete replacement of this, and I could again use this in my presentation to have the data be revealed with different slides. So that is the approach in another program. But in DataGraph, let me show you what I'm doing when I'm doing these presentations, because we're able to avoid having to do any of that moving around of files between them. So let me go back to, or actually, yeah, here's the mode that I want to show you. So what I'm doing right now is I'm going to show you how to use the presentation mode. So you are seeing on the bottom is my laptop screen, which I'm working on, and on the top is going to be the presentation mode. So if I go over to View and say Presentation Mode in DataGraph, if you have an external monitor attached, you will see a representation of that right here. If you don't have an external monitor, you'll only see present in window, which you also can do. That's really more for if you're doing a Zoom presentation, for example, or I mean, I could use that here too. I could put it in a separate window and just share that window. But I'm going to present to my entire screen as though I were, if you were giving a presentation at a talk, for example. So I click that. Now you can see both of my monitors, and you see what is on my second monitor is the graph that I have selected here. And in DataGraph, there's a, oops, my little arrow is not working here. Okay, that's fine. The image that you can see here, hopefully, this is, or there's a little icon on top of the graphic, and it's again representing my two screens, that darker screen or darker rectangle and lighter rectangle. That's an image that represents my two displays. And if I want to change what you're seeing, what you guys see, I can just hover over a different thumbnail and click on that thumbnail, and then it will be displayed in the presentation mode. What's nice about this is that I don't have to worry about any of that scaling that I just did before to get this graph scaled properly in my Keynote presentation. I can just present this, and what the program will do is properly scale the image to the projector that you're using. And you can also do, although I don't have it set up here, you can actually have more than one projector at a given time. So if you did and you went under in DataGraph, Data View Presentation Mode, if you had multiple projectors connected to your computer, you would see multiple projectors listed here, and you can pick which one to present to. So anyway, it's very easy for me to change which image you're seeing, and then control the reveal through my DataGraph interface. So I'm going to, for this file, or this graph, again, I can unhide that data, and if I want to make it do some kind of an emphasis, or maybe not on the outline, but on the point itself, I can do all of that, and I can do all of that very interactively. Okay, so, and I see we have Sweden here today too, so thank you. Very different parts of the world. So the next thing, let me give you another example, because what's cool about this is that not only can I show and present a graph from one file, but within DataGraph, I can then go to another file and present that. So I've changed files. Notice my projector hasn't changed at all until I come here and I click on this thumbnail. So now I'm presenting a completely different graph from a different DataGraph file. So that's another thing that I think is sort of nice about this presentation mode, is that you can interactively go between your files and people won't know any better. So what I did with this graphic, this is actually a pie chart example, or comes from a pie chart example that's within DataGraph, is I'm using what's called a set variable, where I have these checkboxes here, and I have them integrated into my graph, or into how I have this set up, so that if I uncheck, for example, any of these boxes, then they're not going to be shown on the screen. I also put this slider in, but I'll talk about that in a minute. But this is created using a shared mask. So if you've never done this before in DataGraph, this is really worth to know. So I have it already set up here for this one. Since you can see the pie chart on the screen, I don't really need to also show it here. But what you see here is that there is a group that I added with and it's using the description to mask the data. And then I have this inset, and then this is the mask that I created. Okay, so if that's not clear, which maybe that is not, let me just show you this in this example. So here's a graphic. This is the way that it's set up within DataGraph. And in fact, I don't know if I want to do that. Let's just try this. So if I want to add a mask to this that allows me to interactively use these checkboxes to control what you are seeing on the screen, then what I tend to like to do is place my command within a group. So with the command selected, I select the group icon. Oh, I did it twice. So let's undo one of those. And then I can add an overall mask to this pie chart. And I can say I'm going to do this based on the description. And now you're not seeing anything because I'm projecting this image and I haven't finished the mask. And the option here is called inset. So you check that. And then I've already created one here, but you can say create text set from column if you haven't created one yet. I'll just pick the one that's already here. But once you create this, again, then it's very easy for me to uncheck. And I can also hold the shift key down, select everything within the checkboxes, and click this box here to uncheck everything at once. And then I can add which ones I want you to be able to view. And you can add a shared mask like this around any of your commands so that you can really, you can apply this technique not just to a pie chart, but you can apply this technique to all sorts of different commands and different graphs that you've created. And you can have multiple commands within a given group. And I guess quickly, what else I did here was I created, because within the pie command, you have this ability to add an offset wedge. And let me actually show the one that I did here. So the offset wedge now is using this column where I set up an expression, and this expression uses a variable slider that I set up called move, and it's also using this column offset on, where I just have a 0 or a 1. So this is a way that you can, again, control which, in this case, the description, which one I'm giving an emphasis to, because I can easily just, while I'm presenting, if I want to talk about apples, I can change apples to a 1, and then I can use the slider to provide that emphasis. So it takes a little bit of setup, but once you have that, then you have a graphic that allows you, again, to really step through the information and to emphasize different information depending upon what you're interested in talking about. Now this is the animation that I showed you for a transition. And if you can see down in DataGraph, I am moving this slider down at the bottom left-hand corner. This is the built-in animation slider that we have in DataGraph. If you've used the program for a while and you've never used this before, when you're in a file that has animation, you can hit play down at the left-hand corner, and then it will play this animation. So this is kind of a cute way to do sort of a simple transition like this. And in this file, everything is calculated for you. So you can see there's a column with numbers that are changing, and that expression, if you want to explore this at all, is doing a calculation, interpolating between this column, which is called the first, and this column, which is called the second, and then just calculating that. And this is the column that's actually being used in our bar graph. And the equations for that are in here. So this is just another example of what you could possibly do. Okay, now let me show you one that is a little bit more, as I think, an interesting tool, again, for presentation that I have been working on. And this is using a reveal type of approach where we don't have just one line, we have lots of lines of data. this is data on U.S. annual energy production. Crude oil versus coal is what's highlighted here. You can see the years down below here in the x-axis from 1950 to 2020. And what I did within DataGraph, so I'm projecting to you just this image, but I've, again, sort of created an interactive type of a graphic. This is not something you'd necessarily put in a publication, though you could certainly take static images from this and do that. But what this allows me to do is it allows me to change which line is being highlighted, and then it's showing you the name and the color are all synced so that you can compare the two. And both lines can be changed here very interactively. So if I wanted to, just show you highlight solar versus wind energy, then I can go ahead and change my slider to do that. And you can see how this compares to all of the other energy sources that we have. Actually, I think this is pretty fascinating data, showing how in the US, how, wind and solar both are not just a flat line compared to other sources of energy, which they were for many, many decades. We actually now have, a significant enough percentage of our energy coming from renewables that you can actually, see that on this graph. And again, if you're giving a presentation and you want to highlight different aspects, or there's a question on something and you want to move to that, to demonstrate, for example, what is nuclear power doing in this country, versus other sources of energy. So I think this is a really, again, it's not the type of a thing you'd create necessarily for a publication, but for a presentation, I think that this is a really nice and dynamic way to try and present information. And briefly, how do I have this set up in DataGraph? Well, this is data that you can see here. This is a very long table of data. So this is what we would call a flattened data set, where we have, in fact, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, tidy data. This would be considered a tidy data set in the sense that we have our variables in, long columns, or our values are in one single column, and then we have the description in another column, the year in another column. And this data, if I want to plot this, let me just show you what this looks like. If I just did a simple plot of year versus value, then I see all these lines, because again, it's every category is there, and you also see these kind of lines going back and forth. Well, in the plot command, there is a setting that really works well for data like this, where you can say, I only want to connect my data when X is increasing. And so now you can see how, just you see just the lines, because basically the years, which is my X, always reset when the description changes. So here the description in my table is going from coal to natural gas. And at that point, it's putting a break in the line. But this kind of a representation is, again, would be sort of hard to present. It's, there's a lot of information. And so what I like to do is use something like this as a background, give this maybe a gray color is what I did for the graphic here. And then I did in this graphic, I added in 2 commands that have a mask that are only drawing based on a particular ID that I gave to each of these forms of energy production. And that allows me then to, again, have these sliders that I can use behind the scenes to change what you're seeing during a presentation. Okay, and the last one, actually, I guess there's two more that I'm going to show you. I'm going to end with the Hans Rosling version that I have in DataGraph. So here's a file that actually has the same data. This is also in, there's a version of this in the example file, so I'm also working on an updated version of this, partly because also, as DataGraph has evolved over the years, some of the example files, there's better ways of doing things as we've added more functionality. So this file is one that I'm in the process of also doing some update on. And what does this do? Well, you can see here, this is all that data that we looked at in the last example. This is the same data, but now it's in an area graph format. And again, does give you a lot of information, but it can be hard in an area graph to really make comparisons between things. And so another technique, which is what is really illustrated here, is to use one of these moving bar charts or bar chart races. And again, I can control this interactively with my slider. I can start my presentation, and this is a very interactive way of showing the data. In fact, I think I've said this before in talks, that on Reddit, when people started doing bar chart races, they overwhelmed the data is beautiful Reddit, and to the point where they banned them for a while because everything was a bar chart race. But it is an engaging way of presenting data. And here, I think, again, in DataGraph, I can stop this and I can kind of go back and say, this is sort of interesting, because if you look where we started with coal as the number one source of energy production. And then if we continue forward, in the 70s, coal actually was, down at number 3. Natural gas and crude oil took over. But then, if we want to continue, then coal again became the primary source of energy in the US. And now there's a point where 2012, coal starts to go down again, 2015, down again. Natural gas is really taking over. And in fact, the x-axis even had to expand a bit to accommodate that. So this is, I think, a really interesting way of presenting data. And in fact, in this example file, I do also have an inset that shows a reveal along the bottom right-hand corner, where you see that area chart also being revealed at the same time. So the last one that I'm going to end with is, again, the animation that you saw in the beginning. This is the version in DataGraph, and this is using the animation variable. What I did here was I also added some additional interactivity. So again, I can use the slider to go to a certain point. And what I want you to notice, I talked about how I added the labels onto the countries. I think that's actually a really helpful thing to have. But if you do this for every country, then it turns out to be overwhelming. So I had this idea of, why not have this be something that's more interactive? And what I want you to notice is how on the graphic itself, you can see labeled countries with population greater than a certain amount. And I have a slider that I can use to change what that value is. So if I want to show more information, I can. And this file also has that same technique I showed earlier, where it has one of these masks here. So if I want to, for example, focus on Europe, the population for many of the countries is a little smaller, so it's not as easy to see the trends in Europe. But I can go ahead and, for example, look at in 1944, World War II had a huge impact on life expectancy. And I can, interactively go to that point and show you that while I'm doing this presentation. So I've shown you a lot of examples. I knew for this talk I wouldn't necessarily be able to do a step-by-step to show you how to do all of these different things. But what I will say is, this presentation, and I might as well just go ahead and let this play. This technique of showing data that, again, was made very famous by Hans Rosling. This was something that there was someone I talked to a couple of years ago, and he said when he first saw this presentation, he actually started to tear up because it was so fantastic to see, technology pulling this data together and being able to animate it like that. And I imagine that it took them a lot of time and resources to create that animation and to create that. They do have a tool that's out there to do this type of interactive animation. I can show you how to do this in DataGraph, and this is what I'm going to do next week. In fact, I'm going to walk through this step by step and show you all of the steps to make this graph. It really is a matter of starting with a simple scatter graph. We scale the points. We add in the different colors for the different regions of the world. And then there's a point where I just sort of start formatting and added the scale bar below, this idea of the labeling, something that I came up with. So this is something that these are the types of things you can create within DataGraph, and it is not going to take you days on end, in a short period of time, and we'll do that next week. I can show you exactly how to make this and do that from downloading the data to going ahead and making the animation. So that if you do have data that you want to try this out, I think that will really get you to the point where you'll be able to do it. And with that, I hope that this has been useful. Does anyone have any questions or any thoughts? I'm happy to answer them about this or anything else, or any suggestions for anything that you would like to see in the future. Everyone's quiet today. Well, not everyone. I see a few of you there. But yes, I'll comment also for teaching. Yeah, I think that for giving presentations, for teaching, I think that this is really can be such a great tool to use. And I also, although I don't have, I don't have more than one monitor set up for me here, but I've seen many lecture halls where there are multiple monitors, and typically people have the same information up on both monitors. So with DataGraph, using the presentation mode, you could control separately, have one slide up on one monitor and then have other information on another monitor. So one question, does the data need to be in a tidy format for these animations to work? And basically, yes. The idea with something like this, and maybe I'll even just see if I can just maybe share the whole screen. Oh, that was not I want to share my other screen so that you can maybe see this a little bit. Here we go. So I think now you should be seeing just DataGraph so that you can get a better look at this file. But yes, this file is, if you look at the data where this comes from, let me show you just the raw, I'll stop the animation, show you the raw data. This is 3 tables of data. This is fertility, life expectancy, and population. And these are all in a, individually in a tidy format. Now, what we have to do here, because what we're really doing is we're interpolating between individual data points to get this smooth animation of data, everything is being combined into this one table where we're pulling the data in for one particular year. And if I change my my year in my animation, then it's changing the values in the table, and that's what's being plotted. The commands don't know anything about that it's an animation. They're just plotting whatever data I have in the data table. So it's a matter of setting up either pulling in the data like this and having the data that's in these columns depend on a variable like t that I have in my bottom corner, or having some type of calculation that is interactive. I think the one thing that I thought was actually sort of interesting about this, and one of the reasons that again, I'm in the process of updating the example file that we have online now for this, because the instructions that I had were all based on a messy data set. You can download the Gapminder data from the Gapminder website. They have it in several formats, and one of the formats is an Excel table, or Excel-like table, where every column is a different year, and that's what I had previously used. But they do also have the data available in this nice, tidy format, so it saves a number of steps of getting the data and being able to animate it to just already download it in that format. In fact, the energy data that I used earlier for that animation, that also is data that in the past I had downloaded a file that had years, across, but now that data, let's see if I go to this one here, here's the energy data, and it has a category, it has a date, and it has a value. And this is just one very long table. This has 8,000 rows in it, which actually, to be honest, 8,000 rows is not that much in the grand scheme of things. This is still a relatively small data set. The limit that DataGraph has is, there is no limit to the number of rows. It's more of a practical limit of how much, based on the memory of your computer. I think if you go over maybe 10 million, maybe even up to like 50 million, things should still be hopefully relatively snappy for you within DataGraph. So you can have a lot of rows. What you can't have in DataGraph is a lot of columns, because if you bring in something that has, say, 200 columns, which the Gapminder data in the Excel spreadsheets is, where it's the wide format, it has a lot of columns because they have it for every single year. They have the data. Those take a while to import into DataGraph, and you're really not going to want to work with the data like that anyway. So having it, tidy makes a huge difference. And if you're not familiar with that term, or you want to know more about how you can get data in that format, then again, we did a webinar on that a couple of weeks ago. And it's really not that hard. DataGraph has a lot of built-in functionality to make that easier, and a lot of actual data processing functionality. I don't see any other questions. If you have anything, please feel free to pop it on the chat. But I will just show you one thing that I did very recently when I downloaded this data. One of the things I try and do is tell people to always try and download the raw data as much as possible, and try and use that directly in your graphics without a lot of manipulation, because then it's very easy to update the data. This table here, or this group, is is directly downloaded from the web, and but it has the date in a really funny format, because they're combining energy data from 1949, 1950. These years, or this data, is only annual, but the rest of the data they have monthly. So then some of the other dates you'll see are, it's the year, the month, the day, and those make sense. So you may not be able to really notice this immediately, but this is a date column technically, but because the month is 13, if I converted this to a date column within DataGraph, it's going to give me an error for all of these, because 13 is not a month. So it has that built-in error detection. So anyway, so what I need to do here is to pull out all of the rows that, or the only ones I want to plot are the annual versions of the data, because even when you go further down, it still has the monthly mixed with the annual. Anyway, I was doing this by kind of pulling, selecting that data. But what I figured out yesterday was that I could just use an expression for this to pull out a year. So this column called annual is using a modulo function, if you've never used that before, but it's taking this data that I can't really use to plot, and it's allowing me to pull out just the year from only the records that end in the number 13, which I thought was kind of cool. And makes it so that I can then plot this data directly without having to do any significant manipulation of the data. And anyway, like I said, next week we're going to, really delve into the animation with the Gapminder, show you exactly how to do that. So if you're interested in that, is there a tutorial on interpolation? We did a webinar on animation a while back, telling stories with animation, I think is the title of it, that now is a couple of years old. So it's in the older version of DataGraph. But if you go on to our YouTube channel, then I think you should be able to get that video. And my recollection is that that interpolation is discussed in that video in particular, because there's a couple of different ways that you can interpolate within DataGraph. You can use the plot action column to interpolate just, actually the plot action column does interpolation. You can differentiate, you can do, you can integrate data. So there's a bunch of things that it can do. And you find that column under the other drop-down menu. There's plot action. So you could also just add this, and then if you click the gear menu and go to help, it adds the object for that column type, but this will bring you to the help for that. But that does not take into account data that's categorical. And that's where we added the interpolation by category option, which we will talk about next week. And with that, I think we'll go ahead and end for the day. Thanks so much, everyone. And I was thrilled last week that our video actually went sort of mini viral. We had over 5,000 views. I think it's gone more than that. I don't know if we will continue to have that much success, but we really do appreciate you watching. And please, if this is useful for you, please like our videos. We do appreciate it. And anything you need help with in the meantime, certainly let us know. Email us or put a message on the forum. Great. You're welcome. Go ahead and end now.